academic communities, which have always seemed like very open and rich places to explore ideas and meet people, interesting people of all different kinds. And so that's been, I think, a real blessing. And then I guess the challenges, I think one of my challenges was just going through the coming out process as a gay man. When I was a Hopkins undergraduate, I wasn't out, and I didn't feel comfortable being out. And I sort of threw myself into just being a physicist, being, directing all those energies toward physics, which I don't recommend. I think having a strong social life and love life is important to be a human being, a healthy human being. So I did finally come out in graduate school when I was at UC Santa Barbara, and that was I think a very supportive place to come out. And so and then since then, I think that's been something that I've just integrated into my professional and personal identities, and that's been really great.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure such a way to think about. As an undergrad, there's so much going on and transformations that it still occurs even after you sort of graduated and find yourself in this new world. I wonder if you can talk a bit about sort of being in grad school and even after you left undergrad, were there other ways perhaps your FLI identity came out or sort of you were explicitly aware of it?
I guess I don't know at the time that I was a student. I was a FLI student. Neither of my parents had graduated college, but they were very supportive of me getting an education and going to college. And even when I went on to get a PhD, which I think they weren't expecting, like I didn't have any PhDs in our family, they continued to be supportive of that. I think maybe, in terms of while I was an undergraduate, thinking about the kinds of pressures that my family was maybe putting me under to, pursue certain things about, what a family would look like to them and what I should be, focusing on, maybe they didn't fully understand the pressures I was under as a college student. But I do think, to their credit, they were always willing to listen and were sympathetic when I would share those challenges.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And it leaves me wondering, I think something students talk about a lot is sort of the love and values they get from their families and how much that means to them. And perhaps that after they graduate, some relationships change, or even over time relationships change. And I wonder if you've had similar experiences, and if you could talk about that. Do relationships change over time for you as you sort of graduated undergrad?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I made excellent friends when I was an undergraduate, and some of them I count as my closest friends today, even though we only get to see each other rarely. Probably my closest friend, she graduated. She had actually, I think she was also a first-generation student. She had been born in Brooklyn, but grew up most of her life in Barbados, and then so she was sort of coming in, and she would describe herself as just off the boat. That was her description. And I felt like an immense sense of community being Terry's friend, because she was very involved in Caribbean student organizations, and then she was very inclusive and looped me in. We would joke that Long Island was like one of the islands. But then she's since moved to California, and so, it becomes a lot harder to stay in touch with people when they're out of time zone. So we see each other occasionally, and we always catch up, quickly, but it's hard to stay in touch day to day with sometimes the people you hear most about. Yeah.
Awesome. Such a great experience, I think, and a lot of different ways to have intersecting friends like that we sort of meet and have these sort of lifelong commitments to, even if we don't talk every day. I think is always exciting. Well, good. I think as we think about sort of relationships, I wonder if you could also share perhaps sort of, I think students are curious about imposter phenomenon, right? And is it sort of just an episode or a few episodes that happen when you're trying to be competitive and successful in undergrad, or is it something that keeps going after a lifetime?
Oh, God. Yeah, I think imposter syndrome takes a lifetime to get over. I mean, I even remember, like, the first professional talks I gave, which is, like, probably one of the more terrifying things you have to deal with is, like, okay, you have some research you've been working on, and now you have to get up in front of a room full of people and talk to them about your research, and some of the people in the audience are experts in the field, and that can be really terrifying. But I think, I realized that my internal perception of a talk might be very different than people's perception who were watching me. So, I mean, my heart would be beating, and I could barely hear myself over, my own pulse. But then afterwards, people would say, "Oh, that you looked you didn't look nervous at all." And I'm like, "Well, I felt really nervous, But so sometimes I think just pushing through and doing it, and then realizing that even though you might be nervous, and at the time you're giving the presentation, it may feel nerve-wracking, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not doing a good job. And then eventually, over time, the nervousness subsides.
Awesome, thank you. No, that reminds me so much, I think, of, I was a physics undergrad student, and I remember doing a summer research presentation and feeling so nervous, and people used the word expert. I was like, I am not a physics expert by any stretch of the imagination. But to friends, I was. They're like, well, I didn't know any of those things. So I think that helped me sort of calm of like, oh, okay, well, depending on the audience, like, I really am the expert here.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think it's especially with like our students who are we tend to be so ambitious. It's always really easy to take for granted what you've attained and only judge yourself relative to what you haven't yet attained. And I think that's something that can follow you throughout your whole life, or like you always feel like what you've done is never enough because you always see the people who've done even more. But that will always be, and I think it's really important to sit back and think, wow, when I was growing up, the idea that I would be a doctor of physics wouldn't have occurred to me. Like, I somehow pulled that off, and then I managed to find a job in academia, which itself is like a trick. And so I think you have to take the things that you've accomplished and remember that they're substantial and worthwhile, even after they're under your belt.
Awesome. No, it's wonderfully sage advice there. I will agree with. And I want to transition a little bit and think of sort of the planning apparatus of graduating. And I wonder first if you could just share, if you expected sort of your journey so far, did you think you'd sort of become a professor, and certainly then a vice dean or administrator in higher ed?
I guess as a kid, like, I was kind of singled out by people around me as the little professor. So I guess I had a lot of reinforcement in following this particular career path, which was good, I guess. I remember even in fourth grade, I had like the messiest desk in the class, to the point where the teacher had to tape a bag to the side of my class so I could throw all my trash and papers in there and it wouldn't spread out around the desk. And they would call me the absent-minded professor. So I think, like, I guess I did have a sense that from people telling me this so many times that maybe I would pursue this kind of career path. But I think it's still daunting. There are just so many steps to getting, I think, to the end of, or to the, to the middle of your work in any career path, that it can seem daunting as to how you're going to get there. And it's not like success is assured. So I think, just keeping in mind both the goal and like a generosity to yourself of what you've attained and how that will be good, even if even if you get diverted from that path. You know?
Awesome. Now, and were there experiences you had as an undergrad that propelled you in different ways, you think, to be successful or to continue on the path?
Well, definitely my experience doing research as an undergraduate was a huge influence on me, because I had a real crisis of confidence in my undergrad years where I thought, well, do I really want to go on in physics or science? Like, it seems like this is just doing endless homework problem sets that people have done before, and that can be really boring. Mm-hmm. And I think it was only when I got to like do the research and see like, oh, well, this is like solving puzzles, which I love. This is like a problem that nobody knows the answer to, and you know, that seemed a lot more exciting to me than sort of learning about things that people had learned many, many times before. And, you know, having a research mentor and getting to talk about science with them, I think all of those things, building those relationships was really important. And I also went through a kind of broad period of career exploration where I asked myself, do I want to be a science writer? Do I want to go into science policy? And I did an internship in science policy. I took a course in science writing. And I think in each one, I came back to the idea that, well, I could still choose these as my ultimate professions, but probably first I should, if science is always at the center of these pursuits, maybe I should just pursue science as far as I can and then, you know, see where it takes me.
Great. No, I love that perspective. I think is certainly helpful. I wonder, in addition to, if you could talk about maybe how you plan financially for your future after undergrad, were there sort of steps you took there?
Yeah, so I think as an undergrad, it was my first time really realizing that, you know, you really have to pay attention to your finances. I think while living at home, it wasn't something I had to worry about. And, you know, my parents were very generous, but there was a limited amount of money in the bank account. And I remember a few months where there was that terror at the end of the month where it was coming down to close to zero and things, you know, still had to eat. You know, and so luckily I could go back to my parents and ask for a loan or, you know, for them to extend me funds on a temporary basis if I needed it, and that was important. But I think also just having that period where I was trying to make ends meet was important. And then, you know, in grad school, Santa Barbara is not a cheap place to live.
Not at all.
So for most of grad school, I was living in houses with roommates, which could make like different things complicated, like both like finding quiet places to study and do my work, but then also figuring out how do I navigate my social life and have some privacy around that, and, you know, and have roommates who are supportive of me. You know, I think that, you know, finally at the end of grad school, I decided for my own sanity, I just needed to live alone for a little while. So I took out some loans and I rented a studio apartment, and then, you know, eventually I paid off those loans. It wasn't the end of the world. So, but it was what I needed at the time to finish up my dissertation and not go out of my mind.
Yeah, no, the piece of having a quiet, isolated place definitely helps get the dissertation done.
Yeah.
Well, great. I wonder, sort of in the same question, if you could perhaps talk a bit about the first professional job you got, and sort of, were there moments financially where you were like, this is a bit overwhelming, or was it sort of strategies you used to sort of make sure you understood the language that people spoke to you when you were searching for your first job?
Yeah, so it's funny, you know, my path was very academic. So I really went from undergrad to grad school to applying for postdoctoral positions and then to applying for faculty positions. And I was really lucky to have a lot of, you know, people along the way who were willing to provide advice. So, like, I know it was when I was applying for postdoctoral positions after my doctorate, there I was, there were a number of places I got to interview at, and those interviews were, I think, very helpful because they were themselves, of course, your first interview is probably not going to be very good. You have to learn how to interview, and you don't have many opportunities to practice that. So, I think by going on several interviews, it was an opportunity to meet people who are in the field, talk to them, present myself, and try to navigate that whole process. I think one of the things that I realized at the time is that there are a lot of choices you're making constantly, and at the time I had kind of two opportunities after finishing my doctorate. One was I could have gone to a national laboratory, and they were paying quite well, or I could go do a postdoc with an esteemed faculty member at Harvard. He was not paying very well, like half. So clearly one path I was going to be comfortable financially and have a good job and be working with smart people.
Yeah.
And the other one I was probably going to be struggling a bit financially, but, working with one of the world experts. And I chose that path because I knew I wanted to keep open the idea of going into academia, and that would be probably the better path from an academic standpoint. And, there was a little bit of scrimping and saving, and, but in the end, I don't regret it. Like, I think I chose the right path for me.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. And what I heard in sort of your experience that you shared was also sort of a little bit of risk, and you took the risk, sort of invested in yourself. And I wonder, sort of in a broad sense, if you can talk about sort of taking risk and how you might prepare yourself emotionally, physically, mentally to take that risk.
I guess I don't think of myself as a big risk taker. Like, I'm not I'm not the kind of person who goes skydiving or bungee jumping or any of that. Like, that's not me. But I am a kind of person who, I think, tries to take things as they come. Like, I'm not a big worrier, which I know, many people in my life who deal with anxiety and have various, issues around anxiety. I know that's very common. But I do think it's been very helpful for me to, I think by taking a succession of different steps that were themselves challenging to me and then thriving in them. So, going off to grad school, doing okay, even though the first year was hard. I was, seriously distraught about whether I would ever find the right advisor or find a project to work on, or, there were moments, but I pushed through and I got through, and then it was fine. Or going overseas to Korea and living there for a year. It was disorienting. There was, culture shock and how to navigate a foreign city, but I managed and things worked out okay, and people were willing to help me. I think each time going through that, I sort of built the confidence that, even if I don't worry about every little thing, I can kind of make this work out in the end, And I think building up your confidence in yourself that way is
Awesome. No, great. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. And the last question, I don't know if you're a Michael Jackson fan, but it's sort of the idea of looking in the mirror, right? And being able to look back. And what do you think you'd want to share with the young Michael who's 21 going off into the world having graduated, or perhaps these current students who are going out into the world now after they graduate?
Yeah, I think, definitely looking back, I think the thing that I probably most regret is taking so long to come out of the closet. I think I would have probably said to myself, look, it's important. It's fine. You're going to be fine. You'll have a wonderful life. You just have to, accept this aspect of yourself and move forward, and the people who love you will continue to love you. And, this idea you have that somehow you're going to replace, a rich emotional and social life with just immersion in work
Mm.
and science and physics, it's not a good idea. Don't even think that that's like a viable alternative. Like you can have the whole thing. You just have to commit yourself.
Well, awesome. So thanks so much. I'm gonna go ahead and stop.